I want to ask you a favor. Can you tell us what sefer you're reading from and what page you're on, and just a bit of... Okay.
Guide to Shabbos Observance by Rabbi Eli Pick, and we're on the chapter 3, which is regarding Kiddush and the 3 meals.
Okay.
We started it last week, and this is for Refuah, for Shifra Simcha Bat Yeta, and all Cholim of Klal Yisrael.
Amen.
Okay. Amen. So continuing where we left off. Okay, a cup of wine. Yeah. Okay. One must. Okay, there we go. One must discharge one's duties of Kiddush and the blessing on the 2 loaves. One may discharge one's duties of Kiddush and the blessing on the 2 loaves by hearing them from another person. Both parties must have in mind that it is being said for the listener's benefit. Okay, so some people, like myself sometimes, you do Kiddush and lunch combined. You say Kiddush and you do Amotzi straight away. So you can fulfill both at the same time. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be like you have a Kiddush shul, and that's Kiddush, and you go home and you say Amotzi. You can actually do Kiddush just before you vas. And the Kiddush and the meal are included in that one act, one meal, so to speak. But because we know Kiddush, or they would call it a brocha, like a Kiddush, but the actual Kiddush can be done at lunchtime also, for your meal. You don't have to do it at the shul. If you don't do the shul, you can do it just before you vas. Okay, so that's obviously over 2 loaves, it says, Lechem Mishnah. Okay. The cup of wine should be filled to the brim. It must hold at least a reviet, which is 3.3 fluid ounces or 86 milliliters. The person who recites a Kiddush must drink at least most of it, which is described as a cheekful. It is customary for others who are present to partake of the wine. In order to avoid drinking from the same cup, it is proper to pour some wine before you drink it into other people's cups, not like some people drink and they pass it around. Some people still do that these days, by the way.
We learned with COVID not to.
I know, but even with COVID, even last year, I went to the shul and Oak says Kiddush and he passed it around, and it was just difficult. I succumbed. I don't know if that's the right word, because he should have poured it first. It's a bit grob, but anyway, some people still do that, but most don't actually. So let's say you take a friend of mine, which is a good idea for you guys. He has a jug. So he says he pours a little bit of wine or grape juice into the jug. Then he has the Kiddush cup, and he says the bracha. Then pours a little bit with the blessing to add to then drinks from it. Then he pours from the jug into other people's cups, not from the cup. Right. So they got the wine that was blessed. It's included in what they're going to drink.
So that's how Ian Smalovitz does it.
Yeah, that's a normal way to do it, a civilized way to do it, you say. I mean, some people that do it uncivilized are still civilized. They just, they late learners. They take some... But rather do that. So we don't want to whine about this issue too much. They must do it properly, Damon?
Yeah. They must. Okay, just one thing I wanted to mention is that, you see, Kevin is more tactful than me. Because I said to somebody once, I didn't want to beat around the bush because I saw other people were uncomfortable. So at a big table, I did say to somebody once where he drank and passed it around, I said, listen, we're not in nursery school where we feel we're going to catch the cooties from somebody, but I've got an immune deficiency and I really don't feel comfortable when somebody drinks from a cup and hands it around. But please don't be offended. That might just be my hang-up. So maybe I wasn't invited.
That's not saying it. No, it's not saying it, because you do have a problem.
But people must also think.
I wanted the person to know, because if you make up some excuse, they don't know. And I wanted them to think it was like when a woman breaks up with you, she said, it's not you, it's me. In other words, it's
yeah. We've never heard that before, Adams.
yeah. So,
I've never done that to him. No, it's not you. It's me.
So exactly.
I don't like you anymore, so that's me.
Always me. I always get like that. Always me.
But do you agree with
Well,
that?
I found,
Yeah.
yeah. I actually realized that in everything in life, I am a responsible person. Because whatever goes wrong in my marriage, wife says you're responsible.
All right, maybe we'll edit these parts out.
Everything up. If that means you get kicked there and you're undermining us there.
So, no, you know what, Gavin? I think sometimes people should be known tactfully. Say, listen, I got an immunity issue. I'm not comfortable drinking where other people first drank from the cup. I hope you understand. It's my health issue. It's not necessarily for everybody. But it makes a person aware. Some people are not aware, and they keep doing it. Okay, let's get started with the Gemara share.
I actually just don't like it. I actually feel so uncomfortable drinking from somebody else.
No, it's terrible. You know, it's almost. Men. Yeah, it's wrong. Kev, thank you.
I don't mind if a woman drinks from the cup. Hot woman. A hot woman drinks from the cup first. And then it's me. That's absolutely fine. Never had a problem with that.
Okay, I'll be stopping this part and editing it out. Next. Next.
Take 10.
Let's try to get everything in one take if we can. Okay, recording again. Go.
All right. Okay, so let's just, I'm just going to share my screen, guys. And in fact, I'll tell you what we can do. Okay, we've still got a bit of time here. Let me just share my screen. All right. Just quickly, in the merit of your mom, Kevin, what's the Hebrew name? We're going to do the Mishnah.
Shifra Simcha Bat Yeta.
Shifra Simcha Bat Yeta. Okay, for a full refuah. The Mishnah continues the discussion of goring by a tam. If an ox that is worth a manna, which is 100 zuz, gores an ox that is worth 200 zuz, and the carcass is worthless, the damaged party takes the live ox. Okay, so we already said, just in summary quickly, 100 zuz is the body of the attacking animal, gored an ox worth 200 zuz. If it's tam, which it is above here, as you can see, it means that you only have to pay to the extent of the attacking animal's body limitation value and half payment damages. So if the ox was worth 200 and you only owe 50% of that because it killed the ox, how do we know it's worth the full 200 damages? Because the ox is dead and the carcass is worthless. Now you're paying 100, and it's also limited by the capacity of the damaging ox. We also said the carcass is worthless is coming to obviously teach us that if the carcass was worth something, you'd probably only have to pay the balance, just like when your ox falls into the pit of somebody that created that obstruction, he only needs to make good the shortfall. Okay? And then the ox is transferred immediately to the damaged party. So we're going to see whose opinion this is according to. You know it, guys. We're just going to fly through it. We've discussed it. The Gemara identifies the author of our Mishnah. Whose opinion is our Mishnah reflective of? It is of the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. For it was taught in a brisa concerning our Mishnah's case, the live ox should be assessed in court, and its owner should pay the damaged party its value. These are the words of Rabbi Yishmael. So, guys, if it was taught in a brisa, the live ox should be assessed in court, and its owner shall pay the damaged party its value. And this is the opinion of Rav Yishmael, and the only other contrary opinion in this particular discussion is Rabbi Akiva. The reason why the Mishnah follows Rabbi Akiva's opinion is because it says in the Mishnah, after it says, and the carcass is worthless, the damaged party takes the live ox. The fact that the damaged party can take the live ox means the ox itself is automatically transferred to the possession of the damaged party. So therefore this Mishnah is following whose opinion, guys?
Rabbi Akiva.
Correct. Why?
Because that's exactly what he said.
Exactly. So the owner of a tam is required to pay half damages only from the body of the tam itself, migufo. So that was what we learned, Gavin, in the Mishnah in 16b.
Yes.
So Rav Yishma holds that the damaged party doesn't take the live ox, rather based in assesses its value and requires the damager to pay the damaged party half damages up to that value. So it's used almost as, when it comes to court, as an indicator of monies owed. So that if an ox worth 100 zuz, for example, calls an ox worth 200 zuz and the carcass is worthless, the damager must pay the full value of his live ox, 100 zuz, okay, which is equal to the half damage, because it obviously contains both limitations, half payment damage to the value of the gufa. Rabbi Akiva holds that when the value of the live ox, this is the essential point, is equal to the half damage, the damaged party takes the ox itself. Okay, so Gavin asked a very good question last week. He said, well, what happens if that's not the case? Remember, Gavin?
But I would think in the majority of cases it wouldn't be the case.
Correct. So we're learning here what you call almost an artificial idealized case. But how would Rabbi Akiva's opinion still apply? Very simple. Is that if they now become a partnership in the ox, what happens is it certainly pays a contributing factor towards it. What do we mean? We mean, say Arthur's got an ox, and Arthur's ox is worth 150 zuz, and it damages Kevin's ox to the extent of it being worth 80 zuz, right? Arthur can't just give you the ox, because there's 70 zuz that you actually would owe him, because the damage, in other words, the value of his ox supersedes the damage he caused to your ox. So therefore what would happen is you two would be business partners, not happy business partners, but business partners, and you'd have to sell the ox so that Arthur gets to keep the 70 zuz and Kevin can recover 80 zuz. So the principle, Gavin, would still apply, that they're still partners in the ox. That's Rabbi Akiva says. He's saying, obviously, on a practical point, the transfer happens immediately if the value is the same. But the point it's just trying to bring here is that it's done exactly at that point in time, and we'll see in the 34th Mishnah what's the difference. In other words, so you're saying, okay, practically, what's the difference? In other words, when does the transaction take place? So, Kevin, I'll tell you when the implication is, which we're going to learn. The implication affects what happens is that if the ox that damages, okay, the attacking ox increases its value or decreases its value. Does that, in other words, from the time that the damage was done to the time of the court appearance, there is a timeline. Shame, Kev, you're not with us. Huh?
No, my eyes are sore. Let's carry on.
Okay. What did you get so far of what I was saying? The last two sentences.
About the if from the time of damage, the value of the damaging ox might increase or might decrease.
Correct. So what I'm saying is, this is the timeline where there's a car accident. Okay. Let's say you have a car accident. Okay, but you have a car accident, Gavin, in December 2020. You have the car accident, let's say in December 2019, right? And the court case only happens, okay, all of a sudden there's a whole delay of the court case and everything else, and there's COVID. And then the court case only happens because people aren't getting together in court because of COVID in the following year, February 2021. So bearing in mind, there's two factors that have affected things now. Firstly, that the car depreciates every year. Okay, you have a car value, and if you look at the book value, it depreciates every year. That's one factor. And the other factor is during COVID, the international markets of what something was worth, everything was changed and devastated, businesses failed. So now there's a difference between what your car was worth when the accident took place and what the car is worth now, because you've lost technically 2 years worth of value. How did you lose 2 years? Because it went from December 2019, where the car had a value. Now, in 2020, that car, the newer model, is out. So you're losing value immediately the next year, the minute the car's released. Then, because of COVID, you're losing value because the whole economic state is in disarray. And then you lose another year's worth of value because the trial is on the January of the following year. So technically, you've only lost 14 months between court date and actual accident. Now, this can happen, Gavin, in a court, that it can take 14 months. So you've lost 2 years worth of depreciation, plus you've had the world turned over with COVID. All of a sudden, this is going to be an affecting factor. I'm sorry to use this for own analogy, but the thing of it is this analogy is going to affect things because you say, hang on, when do we have to make the assessment? What the value of the car is now or at the value of the time of the accident? And it's not automatic. Rav Yishmael is saying you do it at the trial now because that's when the court discerns the actual case. And then Rabbi Akiva said, well, maybe that's not fair. Maybe it's fair to do it at the time when the accident took place because that's when the real value loss occurred. But maybe Rav Yishmael is saying, no, maybe the value loss occurs now because now is when you actually pay. So it is an interesting discussion when you think of it from those terms. So that's why it's going to have an implication now, Kevin, when we determine, is the court date what determines the value at that point in time or prior to that when the incident took place? I hope you don't mind the analogy, guys. I'm just trying to use a different...
No, that's great.
What?
Most of the time the value would decrease, it wouldn't increase.
Okay, it would decrease in my example, but not, for example, where you're dealing with a car that became a classic or you're dealing with an item that was broken that became an appreciation value. Let me give you an example. We're in the year, somebody in 1999, which is part of the 20th century, Kevin, damages an article, and your case is in the year 2000. Now, all of a sudden, there's a century worth of value that's changed in terms of percentage. Why? Because when you're advertising your thing, you can say it's 2 centuries old, as opposed to, no, I'm serious. So there's an appreciation level there. Because does that make sense? So there can be factors of appreciation. Also, animals can appreciate because they can grow in size. A calf is going to be a different size to a year later when it's a cow. So how do you determine the value? At what point when the damage is done? The potential value that's been lost or the actual value?
That's a hard point, actually.
Correct. And medical bills. In other words, does damaging of the animal actually intrinsically affect how well the animal will develop? So it's not just that your animal damaged and cost damage now. Maybe it affected all future growth. So, for example, take somebody that's injured, right? Somebody that's injured, maybe they had a promising career in football, okay? But that injury has now changed the whole trajectory of their life. And you've affected them more than somebody that was an accountant if you injured his knee. I mean, an accountant is not exactly going to be financially adverse if you injure his knee. He might complain to his wife as he sits in the chair and go, "Oi!" But that's not a career end. It's not like an NFL football player. So it's situational. So these sort of things like animal injury and what the animal is worth, and can the animal continue as a work animal, and does it in fact inhibit its growth? All of these are factors that we're going to be discussing.
Okay.
All right. So with that in mind, I hope you guys don't mind modern analogies.
Not at all.
No, it's a good part.
All right. So in a nutshell, so when it says that the ox itself is automatically transferred to the possession of the damaged party, our Mishnah follows Rabbi Akiva's opinion, because it means that exactly at the time of the accident, it was automatically transferred since they matched in value. So the Gemara explains the dispute between Rav Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. In what issue do they disagree? Well, Rav Yishmael holds that the damaged party is considered the damage's creditor, and he therefore has a claim against him only for payment of money. not from the ox itself. Okay. In other words, the ox would almost have a lien on it, meaning that in lieu of the creditor not being able to pay for the damage, he would then use the ox as part of that payment, Gavin, if it didn't constitute a one-by-one swapping system. Does that make sense? But Rabbi Akiva holds that they're considered partners in the ox. And what implication does this have? Even if the amounts don't match up, they have to sell it together, and the damaged party has to be paid his share. So, in other words, Rav Yishmael says two major differences. The first of it is the court has to decide. And he's saying that only at that point where the court decides is any sort of money transferred. So it's basically that the damager is a creditor that owes the damaged party money. It's just got a claim against him for money. And Rabbi Akiva holds that they're considered partners in the ox from the very time that the damage took place, right? And Rav Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva disagree in the interpretation of the following verse, which deals with a case in which the value of the ox that gored is equal to the amount of loss it inflicted. So in other words, it's taking here a very perfect case. They shall sell the live ox and divide its money. So in other words, Rav Yishmael holds that the merciful one is instructing the court to sell the ox. Until the court does so, it remains the original owner's property. But Rabbi Akiva holds that the merciful one is instructing the damaged party and damager to sell the ox. In other words, this teaches that they're considered partners in it. Okay. Let's go on. So the Gemara now highlights a difference between these two opinions. What is the practical difference between them? So we've discussed one of the practical differences is what? Timeline. Okay. In other words, issues of appreciation and depreciation. Timeline does affect how to make the assessments. Also, the other issues about how it actually works. Well, take, for example, in a case where the damaged party consecrated it. What do you guys? Do you know what consecration means? Arthur, do you know? Because I think
not really. No.
Set aside. No.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So what happens is you've got certain animals in the temple era that you would take to the temple for sanctification. Yeah. So you've got what you call hegdesh. So hegdesh are consecrated items or promissory items where you're going to take that item, like a cow, and then you're going to take it to be sacrificed at the temple. Okay. So here we're talking about two animals, and they were involved in an accident with one another. And therefore, one of the parties decides to take it to sacrifice it before there's a court appearance.
Yeah.
So what is the practical thing? Does it take effect or not? So that's consecration. You can also so consecration also has a implication hekdesh that we learned before, that if temple vessels, if for example an ox that was going to be consecrated damaged another person's ox, does he have to pay if it was temple property or not? Does that make sense? We went through it.
I think that's what we discussed last time as well about that. I remember that.
Yeah. So what we're saying here is, look, there's a practical difference. The first thing is with regards to the damaged party that consecrated it.
Yeah.
Now, guys, I'm going to ask you a question. What's the difference between the damaged party consecrating it and the damager consecrating it, according to Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva? Now I'm really putting you through your paces.
Okay, the damaged party. Well, I'm just trying to think here. Hold on, I think when I was learning 34, something came up with this earlier. I'm
only asking you within 33 on purpose.
Oh, within 33. Okay.
That's only fair to everybody.
Okay. I'm drawing a blank down.
Can I try, Gavin? Okay, others are on. Okay, so if it was consecrated by the damager before, that takes preference. That's like a preferential creditor. The temple is, it can't be, can't be taken.
That's not what we're asking yet, because that is preserved. It's a good point. Let me clarify my question for you guys. I think before we address this question, in our own words, we need to have one thing clear in the Gemara. The first thing is, before we can do application of law, we have to understand what the law is. So you have 2 points of view. So Rabbi Akiva says that at the point of the accident or the damage, that's where transfer takes place. And Rabbi Yishmael said, until the court hears the case, that's the timeline at which it takes place. Okay. For the reason of obviously creditor versus partner. Okay, that's the reason. So what implication does it have? If we say that there's a difference between them with regard to a case that the damaged party consecrated it, according to Rav Yishmael and according to Rav Akiva, who says it's consecrated and who said it's not? If we are talking about here the damaged party. I'm pushing you guys. Damaged party now, guys, not damager.
Okay, damaged party.
I would think the damaged party, according to Rabbi Yishmael, would be a problem.
Okay.
For Rabbi Akiva, it will be fine, because Rabbi Akiva says that he can take that animal.
Perfect.
Rabbi Yishmael says you can't.
Perfect.
And then, okay.
And Rabbi Hillel. Rav Hillel, we hold by the opinion of Rav Hillel in the house of Beit Hillel. Perfect. Kevin, Arthur, did you hear his answer? Say it again.
Yeah.
And tell us why.
Okay, he said, so he meant, he was talking about the difference between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael, where Rabbi Akiva says, yes, you can take it, and Rabbi Yishmael says, no, you can't. Take possession of the animal, has to go to Beth Din.
No, Arthur, you're missing it. You're missing it.
Am I missing it? Okay, well, that's what I grasped, but maybe I didn't understand
the concept. What Gavin got is how to apply that concept. Okay, so this is...
I struggle with that.
No,
I've been a good lawyer.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's exactly why we're here. It's not for me to feed you. You guys are not chickens. So what Gavin did is... why am I not a chicken? What Gavin did was he applied the law. So what we said is that the first thing Gavin heard was the word damaged party, Kevin. Because unless you know if we're talking about, what happens if the damaged party consecrated it? Your question reverses if you're talking about the damager that consecrated. So the first thing where Gavin's ears were attuned to discern between the damager and the damaged. Why, Kevin? Because the opinion switches over if it's the other party. Does that make sense? If there's a rule governing damaged and damager and transfer of ownership, the rule of what's allowed and not allowed is dependent upon which party you're talking about. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about the damager, it's an opposite explanation to the damaged party. In other words,
so the damager is the attacker.
Yes, the damager is the attacker. The damaged is the injured. Therefore, if a rule says yes for the damager, it's no for the injured. If it's yes for the injured, it's no for the damager. That's important. But we're saying that once you understand that, we are saying who says no and who says yes. Does that make sense, Gavin, how to learn Gemara?
Okay, so if Rabbi Yishmael says no, then Rabbi Akiva says yes. That's basically what you're trying to say to me with the taking of the animal.
Well, no, I'm saying that, but that's the obvious thing. What I want you to do is how to apply it. In other words, after you definitely have the first step. Once you know their opinions, you would know in a situation who would say yes and who would say no. Then the second part you've got to say is, let me listen for the word damaged or injured versus attacker, damager. Because when you know that, the opinion would be opposite. Because the one would be the aggrieved party and then one would be the aggressor. So we have to listen to one thing. is the opinion of each rabbi. Which party are we talking about? The injured or the injurer?
Okay.
And what are we talking about? Meaning, is it sold? Is it consecrated? And how that affects the other party. That's how you put a case together. So we understand the principles. Who says what? Why are they saying what they're saying? Why is the Rabbi Akiva saying it's a transfer of the animal? Because the merciful one said they're partners in it. The minute there's damage, they have to settle together. Why does Rav Yishmael turn around and say it's at the time of the court hearing? Is because basically you have no claim against the actual animal. You're just a creditor where the animal would suffice, where there's a lien on the animal as part of payment, but the court would have to assess. So we have to understand who says what, why they're saying it, which parties, and where the case where the damaged or injured party consecrated it. According to Rabbi Akiva, it's consecrated. The reason why is the transfer of ownership occurs at the point at which the goring took place. So if afterwards, before the court date off, it was consecrated by the damaged party, Rabbi Akiva holds that consecration is valid. Rav Yishmael doesn't, because he just says until the Beis Din assess it, it still belongs to the damager, because the ox itself is not transferred at that point. The only reason Rabbi Akiva says the actual ox is transferred is because the amount is equatable. What would happen, as Gavin said, is if the amount is not equatable, they'd still have to be partners in selling the ox together. And in that particular case, it's different to Rav Yishmael, who says that the attacking party is just a creditor that owes the damaged party money, and the ox is used almost as a lien against it in case he hasn't got money. He would then have to sell it at the point at which the Beis Din assesses. So we're talking about now the period of time from accident to court date and that time in between. That's what we've got to focus on. So if in that time in between the damaged party consecrated it, at that point, Rabbi Akiva said it holds because the transfer already took place of the animal. Rav Yishmael said they're still waiting for the court date. The damaged party can't consecrate it. In other words, he might have taken possession of it like almost as collateral, but he can't do anything until the court date. Okay, very clear.
You got it.
Right, let's move on to the next part. So the Gemara cites a related inquiry. Rava inquired of Rav Nachman, if the damager sold the ox, what is the law according to Rav Yishmael? So now we've gone from the damaged party that consecrated it to the damager. In other words, we've now reversed positions. So we're saying, what happens if my ox attacked Gavin's ox and gored it? And before I had a chance to pay Gavin with the actual body of the ox, I sold the ox to someone else. That's the case we're dealing with. So the roles have reversed. It's not the damaged or injured party consecrating the animal. It's the damager that sold it before he dealt with the payment aspect to the injured party. And again, we're talking time period, Kevin, from between the accident and the actual court date. Because after the court date, there's nothing to talk about. There's nothing to talk about. The only question is in between. Because Rabbi Akiva says the transfer happens at the point of accident, and Rabbi Yishmael said we only make an assessment during the trial, and after the trial, the assessment is valid. Okay? So in between, we are saying what happens if the attacking party, my ox that attacked Gavin's ox, at that point, I decided, you know what? I need to get some cash. I'm going to sell the animal. Good luck. Let him see if he's going to claim from me. What is the law as far as that's concerned? And if Gavin says, well, how can that happen? Gavin, not everybody is as moral as you. That's why we have courts. So Rava inquired of Rav Nachman, if the damager sold the ox, what is the law according to Rav Yishmael? What do you think the law is, guys? I'm asking you a question. Now, Gavin, I know you know the answer. Do you want to apply it?
I'm trying
You
to
want
think.
the question again? I can ask it to you.
Give me the question again. Just give it me again in a way I can understand, yeah?
Okay, I'm going to ask Kevin as well. Why do I know Kevin knows it? If he knew the previous, he knows how to apply it now. So, if the damages sold the ox, what is the law according to Rabbi Ishmael in that between period between accident and court trial? If the damager, the attacking ox owner.
Okay. I don't think he's allowed to sell it during that time.
Why?
Because it actually belongs technically to both until the court date.
Okay. Good.
Because that's what Rav Ishmael says. It can't be sold before the court date. Because it's got to be valued. So how can you value something that's already been sold?
Good point. Actually, that's also a very good point.
By the court date.
And what did Rabbi Akiva say?
Rabbi Akiva would say sell it and split it and take whatever you need out of it. That's what I think you'd say.
Okay, so that's true. In other words, it's not even in. Well, he wouldn't say it exactly in this Mishnah because this Mishnah the amount of damage and the amount of attack would be the same. He would just He would just say, "What are you talking about? The damaged party already has the ox." The minute it happened at the accident, the transfer took place. If the amount was equal, your answer is correct. If the amount isn't equal, they'd have to sell it together. The damager can sell it on his own, correct? And Kevin, what would your answer be?
Well, Arthur, I agree with Arthur. I was going to say it can't be sold. It can't be because it has to be assessed at the court.
Good. All right. So let's see what the Gemara says. If the damager sold the ox, what is the law according to Rav Yishmael? Do I say that since Rav Yishmael said that the damaged party is considered the damager's creditor and has a claim against them only for payment of money, it follows that if the damager sold it, it's sold? Or perhaps I say that, how do I word this? I say that since the ox is under lien to the damaged party, it is not in the damager's power to sell it. That's what Arthur said. So in other words, how do we look at it? Arthur's got a valid point. He said, listen, if it's under lien to the damaged party, you can't sell it because you've actually that animal isn't in a position to be sold at that point. And we're saying that if it's just money that's owed, is there in fact actually a lien on that animal itself? Or is it just money owed? Well, you can sell the animal. And as long as the guy's got the money, obviously if he's got the money, no money, there's nothing to talk about. That ox has to be used. You can't. But if he has the money, is the lien on the actual ox itself? Or is it just is he just a creditor for money in lieu of the damage caused with the tamox?
I think it's just I think it's in lieu of the damage. If he's got the money, then it's in lieu of it before.
So we don't know yet for one reason. This is a tam ox.
No, that's I think. I'm assuming.
Okay, but there's what I'm saying to you is a tam ox means it says you pay for you shall sell the live ox and divide its money. Meaning that on a tam ox there seems to be a actual claim on the body of the animal, because if that's a limiting factor, that when you pay, I'm just bringing an issue to you, Gavin. If you pay and you say the first limit is half payment damages to what we owe because the animal itself is tame, that's fine. But your second leniency to the limit of the body of the attacking animal, it means why have that limit if there's no lien on the animal itself? Because it means that the attacking animal is only worth X. So if you damage more than that, you can only take that animal that caused the attack. Meaning it would seem to imply on a tam animal there's a lien against the actual animal itself by the verse. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I understand.
All right. So
you can't sell. I mean, it's lien is for your use. It can't be sold. You can't do anything with it.
Yeah. So
it's just like a reserve.
Saying is Until the court date, you need the actual ox to assess, even if it's if it's purely for a creditor. In other words, if you're going to pay the equivalent, what difference does it make if you sell the ox if the guy's got the money? Or do we say there's a lien on the actual animal because there's a concept that the second leniency is, I'm making a pun on the word lien and leniency. Kevin would love that. It was a hard one to do. So in that particular case, is that animal itself, because you paying to the maximum capacity of the damaging animal, does that count as part of the fact that you have to use an animal? Otherwise, why would that be the limiting factor? Okay, because of the second leniency on time. All right, good. Let's go through it. So, Rav Nachman replies to Rava, if the damager sold it, it is not sold. Well, okay, for exactly the two reasons that Arthur was saying. The first reason is that either there's a lien on the property of the ox itself, or the fact that the court date hasn't occurred. So even though the court date hasn't occurred, there's nothing that you still can't sell the ox. There is a lien on that actual ox itself. So it seems to answer the question that Rav Yishmael's, even though he's saying there's a creditor, that he still owes the money, and the ox would be paid in lieu of payment if there was no money. It would still seem that he can't sell it until the court date. Okay. So Rava counters what it was taught in a brisa, if he sold it, it is sold. Rav Nachman replies, indeed it is sold, but the damaged party can go back to the buyer and collect it for payment on his loss. In other words, what we're saying is here, Gavin, there are two brises, and they complain, and there's an issue here because there's contradictory rulings on both the brises. Okay, so Rava is citing a brisa that says that the ox is sold. There's another brisa which is cited below that says the ox is not sold. Now, we know that Rava was a genius and he knew both brises. So he wanted to resolve the apparent contradiction between them by posing the inquiry to Rav Nachman. And then basically whatever Rav Nachman would have said, he would challenge with the other brisa. That's what it says in Torah Sachaim. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So he's saying, look, on the one hand, so this is the answer. So he was saying, look, I don't understand. The one brass, it says that if it's sold, it's sold. Or perhaps in this particular case, if it's sold, it's not sold. So which is it? So we're saying if you sold it, it is sold. All right. So what do you think the obvious answer is here, guys? I want to question you.
Okay. I hope you like this. Okay, so if the attacking ox attacks if the attacker attacks the ox, right? Does the owner go up to him and say, lean on me?
Okay.
I'm surprised that took so long to come out from here. Good one.
That's good.
I was waiting for Damon to finish. I've been thinking about it for a while.
That's good.
Kevin, this is supposed to be yours.
Damon.
No, Kevin, you're slipping. All right.
How can it be sold before a court date? How can it?
Okay, so
it depends.
All right, so this is a good question. So what we're talking about here, Kevin asked a pretty good question. He said, I don't understand how it could be sold before the court date. So let's look at reality here very, very quickly. My ox damaged your ox. I should have a conscience. I don't have a conscience. I didn't wait till the court date, so I sold it to a buyer. I got money, and because I was short of money, and I thought, if you got a case against me, what have you got? You don't have the animal. I've sold the ox. Because what did we learn before? We learned this particular case about that if it's fixed land, you can claim it back because there's a lien upon the fixed land, but there's no lien upon movable property. We learned this, guys. We learned this in 11b on note 29.
And it was covered. It was covered in what we did on Saturday as well.
Yeah, but apart from that, guys, just hang on a second.
We had done this before.
No, hang on, guys. You see 11b3 back in the day. Okay?
Yeah, that's very clear.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is we did it. When you're dealing with fixed property, you can have a lien on it because you can't hide it under your pocket. Movable property, if somebody owes you money, you can't use that as collateral because he can sell it under your nose. Okay? So there's...
And it's also difficult, one thing that it's also difficult to identify if it's like an animal or something.
It's great answer. It's exactly that. That's exactly the case of an apotiki. Exactly, it's hard to identify. I mean,
that's hypothek.
Hypothek, comes from the word hypothetical. It's Greek, which means if I say there's a hypothetical situation, it means a situation that you're imagining is going to take place. And that's the concept for a pledge. A pledge means you don't own it yet. I'm hypothetically saying that I will owe you back the money. That's a pledge. Comes from the word hypothetical, which is Greek, which is where we get the word apotiki or hypotheki from. That's exactly it, Kevin.
Okay. James, can I share a screen quickly?
Yeah.
Okay. Just give me permission. I'll show you now so you guys can see it clearly. That's not letting me. Let me try again.
I'll give you permission now. Give me a second.
Host Damon. Okay.
Yeah. Go for it.
Okay. It still says no. Let me try one more time. The host stable participant share screen sharing, so I can't share it.
Yeah, try now.
Okay, yeah, it's letting me share. Okay. There we go, guys. What Damon was talking about. 11B3.
That's exactly it. Thanks, mate. Thank you, mate, so much.
Okay. So we can leave it on while we're talking.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Perfect. All right. So what I was going to say is, we can't while we're talking, but I want you just to read it. Here, with what case are we dealing with? A debtor made the slave an apotiki and then sold him. Ula teaches that Rav Elazar's rule that a creditor may collect the slave from the purchaser in accordance to that which Rava stated. For Rava said, if a debtor designated his slave as an apotiki and then sold him, his creditor may collect from the slave. However, exactly as Gavin said, if he designated his ox as an apotiki and then sold it, he cannot collect the debt from the animal. What's the reason for the distinction? This is the designation of a slave as an apotiki becomes public knowledge, while the designation of an animal as an apotiki does not become public knowledge. So why does it not become public knowledge, Gavin? For two reasons. Number one is that one animal is not distinguishable from another. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the face and the thing, brown spots, one white spot, two brown spots, two white. You can't see one from another. They all look the same. Cows are cows. But an apotiki is a human being. And a human being's face is totally and personality completely distinguishable. Even if he's a slave and he's indentured for his labor, he's completely distinguishable from someone else. That's the first reason. The second reason is that a slave can furnish his own witnessing. So he can in a court turn around and say, I was sold as collateral, and he can make evidence within a court. Okay? And because a slave talks amongst his community, it becomes public knowledge. So the fact that he can give testimony and the fact that he is physically distinguishable are both reasons that it becomes public knowledge. Okay? Unshare the screen.
Okay, doing it now. Okay.
So apotiki and hypotek is the word saying in a future scenario. That's where we get the word pledge from, Kevin. It's a Greek word. Okay. So we say hypothetical situation, hypoteki. Okay. So that being the case, it's a pledge or a promise. So you can only do that on fixed property unless you make a designated slave an apoteki, because a human being isn't hiding. He's got his family. He can provide evidence in a trial, and he looks distinguishable. Fine. So what's the argument here? It's fine. How do you collect the debt back from the buyer if it's movable property? I damaged your cow, Kevin, and I sell my cow to Gavin. How then are you going to get my cow back from Gavin when there's no lien generally on movable property, except for an apotiki. That's the problem. How do you have a claim back?
Yeah.
Well, what court case? If that's my only asset, how are you going to get money from me? I've spent the money on wine, woman, and song. I decided to take the money from the car and go to a saloon. Have a good night. And I don't remember in the morning what happened. Yeah. And then in the meantime, you're waiting for damage paid. I said, what cow? And then so that's what we're talking about. It's an irreversible. How can the court reverse it if there's no lien on that cow? The buyer can't take it and give it to you as the damaged party. It would seem so far in the dust. And if that's my only asset, you can't get the money from me. Basically, Rava is saying to Rav Nachman is, if it's either sold or not sold. And Rav Nachman says, yes, it is sold, but it's sold in a way until the damaged party goes back to the buyer and collects it. And what he's saying is, but can such a sale in fact take place if we learned about movable items not being an apotiki unless it's a slave? In other words, on what basis can you collect it? That's one of the questions. The other question that's asked is, can the damaged, so Rava says, but since the damaged party can go back and collect it from the buyer, in what respect is it sold? So he's saying, okay, so fine. Let's just say for some reason there is power for the damaged party in this case to collect it from the buyer. Then in what case can you say that it's sold? Because there's another brisa that said it's not sold. And another brisa that said it is. So in other words, Rav Nachman said it's not sold because the damaged party can collect it from the buyer. So in this case, it seems to be an exception to that rule of an ox being an apotiki. So I said, fine. If you can collect it back, it's not sold. So what do you do with the brisa that says it is sold? In what sense is it known as sold? Because it's not permanent. So it's sold in the sense that it's sold for plowing. Now, can anybody tell me what that means if you did Chazorah? Guys, I can't hear you. Are you on mute?
No, I'm on mute. I can answer.
I'm not on mute, so I'm fine.
Answer me, Gav.
Okay, so the person lands up buying. He's buying this usage of that animal in his. That's what lands up happening. So that's the sale. So the plowing is usage. So as long as there might be 6 months or a year until the full case actually happens, and that guy's buying the usage of that 6 months or a year. And after that, it has to revert. This is based on what Arthur said, which is a very good comment, is that if that animal is sold, how do they value it at the court date? It's a big problem. So it's a good point. So it has to go back to the original, it has to go to the damaged party.
Okay, so what Gavin is saying, and I think it's a good point, is what do we mean for those that haven't done Chazorah in terms of usage, and what do we mean it's sold for plowing? This is what we're saying, is that in the interim, until the damaged party has worked out that the seller has sold it to another buyer, it is being used by the buyer because the buyer bought the ox in good faith. Why did he buy it in good faith? Because there is generally, except in this exceptional case, it would seem, no lien on movable property such as an ox, only on a slave. And therefore, he bought it in good faith because there's no reason to assume that the law is different. So in this case, he's used it in the interim as a tool to plow land. Okay, in other words, he's used it as a working animal. So when the damaged party goes back to the buyer and claims it, the damaged party, who's the true owner according to Rabbi Akiva, cannot turn around to the buyer and say, at this point, you owe me for rental for the cow. In other words, my cow deteriorated in 6 months because of the work you put it through, and you owe me the money. Why can he not? Because the buyer bought it in good faith. It's not like he bought a fixed piece of land where the onus is on him to check if there is a lien on the property in the title deed. Does that make sense? So he can't be punitive against the buyer. He should be too happy that he located the buyer and he's able to get his cow back, and he has to take the loss of not learning revenue or any deterioration the animal had as a workhorse. Okay, so.
Hey Damon, I have to go now. Sorry, man. I'll check the end of it in the video. Okay, leave it.
Okay, perfect.
Cheers, man.
Cheers.
Bye.
Okay.
Ciao.
So, so that's according to Rashi. If the buyer plows it before collection, he's not required to pay the damaged party for use of the ox. But it emerges from Rashi's explanation that the buyer is exempt from paying only according to Rav Yishmael. According to some opinions of Rabbi Akiva, he would be liable to pay because according to Rabbi Akiva, the transfer took place at the exact time of the accident. So he actually does owe the damaged party. But Rav Yishmael said he can't owe the damaged party because it wasn't the damaged parties until the court assessed it to be so. So in that case, he definitely doesn't owe the damaged party for that. But according to some opinions of Rabbi Akiva, he would owe the damaged party because it's he used the damaged party's without permission. Without permission. But according to other opinions of Rabbi Akiva, even Rabbi Akiva wouldn't hold him liable for the plowing, Gavin. And the reason is a different reason, is that if a thief kidnaps a cow, okay, and he then brings it back, he doesn't have to pay for the use of that. He doesn't have to pay. Say he came clean and he said, listen, I did bad, and it doesn't come to trial and he brings it back. He doesn't have to pay for the use of that animal. They let a thief off for that, as long as he brings back the cow. So how is the buyer any different to a thief in that at least the buyer bought it? If the thief is shown that much mercy, a buyer for sure that bought it legitimately is thrown that mercy, according to some explanations of Rabbi Akiva. And according to those explanations, not even Rabbi Akiva, even if the transfer took place at the time of the accident, and that buyer took it between that and the trial, would be obligated to pay for the plowing. Does that make sense? If we don't even hold the thief responsible. Others saying, no, transfer took place already, he does owe for the rent of that cow plowing. So either way, that's pretty clear. Now, let's just end off on one quick note, is that the Gemara questions Rav Nachman's interpretation of the Brisa. Shall we learn from it that if a person borrowed money and then sold his movable property, the court can collect it from the buyer on behalf of the lender? I'm going to repeat this again. Do we learn from this that if a person borrowed money and then sold his movable property, the court can collect it from the buyer on behalf of the lender? But movable property is never incumbent upon a lien. Since the ox is movable property, why should the damaged party be entitled to take it from the buyer? Okay, which is a good question, because a lender can't rely on movable property as security for a loan, since it can be hidden away. So therefore, under Talmudic law, there's never a lien on movable property. You can check the Rambam. Okay, in our case, the damaged party shouldn't be allowed to collect the ox from the buyer, based on that logic. So the Gemara answers there, in the case of an ox that gored, it's different, because it's as if he made his ox an apotiki. What do we mean by making his ox an apotiki? An apotiki is a property specifically designated by a debtor for collection in case he's unable to pay his obligation, right? So since the Torah entitles the damaged party to collect specifically from the tam that gored, the Torah is in fact designating it as an apotiki for this debt. And even movable property carries a lien when it is designated as an apotiki. So that's according to Rashi. But that would be Rashi explaining Rabbi Akiva. Why Rabbi Akiva? Because Rabbi Akiva says that that partner's in the ox, right? But Rav Yishmael said, no, it's just a creditor that has a lien on it. So what makes this special? Because the other opinion is what makes it special is there's a biblical mentioning that with a ton ox, you pay from the body of the attacking animal, and that's where the payment is limited. So even though it's a lean and he can pay the cash equivalent, that particular animal itself has significance. But if you would say that maybe no, according to certain strict opinions of Rav Yishmael, it doesn't have significance because it's purely a creditor. And he doesn't hold that tam as anything more than a financial constraint to the body of the attacking animal. The answer is as follows, is that when there's a car accident in a community like Glen Hazel, right? Everybody knows about it, Gavin, with hearsay. Everybody knows. Oh, at Kosher, well, two cars banged into each other, and you should have seen the mess, and it stopped traffic, and people couldn't go to Yeshiva College, and they had to exchange details. It becomes public knowledge. So if you've got an ox that damages another ox, why would it become public knowledge? Because people gossip, and people also don't want to go near anybody that has got an ox that does damage. Would you want to, if there's somebody known in the community not a careful driver, wouldn't you want to avoid them? Yes. So therefore, it becomes public knowledge as a warning that an ox scored such and such in a place. Because in order that a tam becomes a muad, there has to be a warning. Is there not, Gavin?
Yeah.
So therefore, it becomes public knowledge. So therefore, it's not like an indistinguishable cow that you owe a debt for. That cow is a dangerous cow. Because it became public knowledge, it's one of the rules that you can become an apotiki through public knowledge, because it's known that a slave is distinguishable, but also that he can furnish evidence on his own behalf, and people know that he's now indentured to somebody else. It's the public knowledge of it which prevents somebody from hiding that piece of movable property away in the case of a cow, or that ability for a slave to give testimony or look different to somebody else and community gossip to make sure that that movable property can't be hidden under the creditor's nose. And since that ox is a damager and it's warned and it's knowledge, it can serve as an apotiki. Okay. So that's the case of it. So then solder's credit can collect the debt from the slave. He designated his ox as an apotiki, and then soldered his creditor cannot take the debt from it. In our case, we're dealing with an ox. That's what the Gemara is asking. So how in this case, it's an ox. It's not distinguishable. And the Gemara, exactly as we said, rebuffs the challenge. What is the reason that if he made a slave an apotiki and sold him, the creditor can collect his debt from him? It's because the apotiki designation of the slave becomes public knowledge. Okay. And the ox that gore too becomes public knowledge, since people call an ox that gores because they want to avoid it. I added the word avoid it at the end. All right, guys.
Okay. Before you go, can I ask you a question? Sure. This whole thing is about a guy that only owns one ox, or does he own multiple oxes?
Even if he owns multiple oxes, there is a process that before an ox becomes muad, they'd have to warn that ox. How would you distinguish an ox come from muad? Maybe they brand the ox.
Okay.
In other words, maybe they give it 3 brandings, and then after the third one,
3 strikes and you're out.
3 strikes and you're out. Gavin and I said, how do we know that that's this particular ox? It must be some sort of branding system, Gavin. I'm not sure.
Yeah, or maybe they clip the ears like they did to the people.
Yes, but they make a marking of some sort.
There has to be a marking. There has to be. Otherwise, there's not. Otherwise, how can you publicize that this animal? Do you publicize it?
Yeah.
One of 50.
Yeah. Because I mean, if you've got a whole lot of oxen, and you have to distinguish the muad from the tam.
Yeah. All right,
otherwise,
guys.
like you said, it's all one face.
All right, guys. Listen, Arthur, I'm going to ask you on this one. I'm going to try and do the editing, but if there's a problem, I'll ask you to. But I don't expect you to until I hit a hit.
Yeah, the small fee, no problem. I'll sort it out.
Yeah. As you said, circus, not your monkey. So if I'll try and fix it, if I land in trouble.
But you guys are my circus and you're my monkeys.
Yeah.
Funny, just raise a point. I'm just thinking now, they probably branded their animals in those days as well, like they do in the States as well. What happens is you've got a herd of 100 or 200 animals, and your neighbor's got a herd of 200.
To stop theft. They did it to stop theft.
You know, what happens if there's a mix-up? They cross over, they get through the fence or something, and all of a sudden there's 50 of your animals there. How do you know who's who? And how do you know if it's 50 or 100? You don't. So I'm sure they must have branded their own animals. and then they must have put another mark on if it was more than 10%.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Because that technology has been around from the beginning. To brand an animal is not difficult. The technology, they had, what's it called, those Iron Smith guys and all those guys that made that steel and all those guys could brand. And then the clipping of the ear is another option.
Exactly. Good point, Gavin, is that since time immemorial, you'd have to say this is the property of, and what ox number it is, and have some sort of inventory. Otherwise, it'd be stolen. You wouldn't be able to claim it back. You need evidence. And this marking is a further marking in terms of behavior. It's just a further marking. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
So then, how would you answer that apotiki answer? Because you say then one cow is distinguishable from another. So the reality is, it could just be purely on the basis of denial. You say, I'm going to pay you a cow. You don't say, I'm going to pay you cow 1427-7. I'm going to pay you a cow with 200 grams. In the meantime, you give him a cow that's got syphilis. It's got 5 months to live. You know what I'm saying? All right.
I didn't know cows got syphilis, but it's my first time.